Hey guys, my name is Alex Grakov and welcome to the Dragon Armor project, or how to configure and troubleshoot FortiGate firewall. In today's topic, I will show you an example of FortiGate SSL VPN configuration with Google SAML authentication. I will show you how to configure SSL VPN to the default portal, SSL VPN with the realms, and how to do basic troubleshooting with some examples. In all above scenarios, FortiGate will be acting as a service provider and Google will be acting as an identity provider. First of all, let's discuss what is SAML. SAML is Security Assertion Markup Language. It is XML-based open standard data format. It's communication between authentication and authorization. Why we choose SAML? It's improved security. We only need one directory server. It's improved access, you just need sign in once, and it's reduced administrative efforts. There are two types of SAML. Identity provider, who is providing online resources to give authentication to end users over the network, and service provider, who is providing resources to end user for single sign-on. In short, IDP, who is doing authentication, Google, Azure, Okta, and there are many more vendors, and SP, who is providing the service, SSL VPN access, FortiGate admin access, captive portals. In a SAML, I would expect the following flow. Client is trying to get access to some resources on the service provider side. For example, FortiGate admin access, SSL VPN web portal, or SSL VPN tunnel mode. Then FortiGate generates SAML request, and client is getting redirected to the login page of identity provider. Then client is entering credentials on identity provider side, his username, password, and if there is two-factor authentication is implemented, entering the code or approving the code from his mobile device. As soon authentication is done on identity provider side, identity provider will generate SAML response, and it will redirect back to the service provider with assertion of username and group name. Then FortiGate will verify SAML response and based on policies or rules will allow or deny access to the resources. Let's configure first FortiGate as service provider for SSL VPN access to the default portal, and later on I will show you how to configure it with the realms. For the convenience, I have pre-configured template for the service provider with Google SAML authentication. This template is only for SSL VPN access. Now I will use this template for the default portal to configure service provider links for SAML authentication. I will need to enter my FortiGate FQDN or IP address and SSL VPN port. I would recommend you to use FQDN and publicly signed certificate for SSL VPN access, as it will reduce amount of errors and not necessary calls from the endpoint users. In my environment, I will be using high-range port number to access a SSL VPN portal. In my template, I am using attributes for username as username and for the group name as a group name. You can configure those attributes for any names that you would like to use. For example, group name can be group, my group, etc. And same for the username. It can be user email, user, etc. Please keep in mind that those attributes for username and group name are case sensitive, and it must match both service provider and identity provider side. My FQDN will be dragon-armor.grakov.lab. My SSL VPN port will be 63443. In the final, FQDN with the port number will be dragon-armor.grakov.lab column 63443. Now I will replace FortiGate FQDN and port number with the actual FQDN and SSL VPN port number into the template. Here's example. Now I will use my pre-configured template to configure IDP side. This template is pretty much only missing tenant ID and certificate. I will copy this template into the Notepad++ for the convenience. Now I will configure the IDP side. Once I log it into the admin portal, admin.google.com, I will go to the applications, web and mobile applications. Add application, add custom SAML application. For the application name, I will use Dragon Armor Project, and for the description, SSL VPN. Then click Continue. Google offering two options. Option number 1, download IDP metadata. And option number 2, copy SSO URL, entity ID and certificate. We will use option number 2. Firstly, let's copy SSO URL. And we will paste it under IDP single sign-on URL field. Then let's copy entity ID and we will paste it under IDP entity ID field. Then we will need to download certificate. Later on we will import into the FortiGate. Click Continue. Google is asking SES URL and entity ID. SES URL is Assertion Consumer Service URL. This URL that IDP needs to know so it can send post request back to the service provider without results. IDP site only cares about SP's SES URL, not the portal URL or start URL. In current FortiOS implementation and terminology, also by some other vendors, SES URL will be the same as single sign-on URL. Keep in mind that FortiOS 7.04 and up in the GUI have corrected it to the friendly name SES URL. So let's copy our single sign-on URL and we will paste it under SES URL. Then let's copy entity ID and let's paste it under entity ID. Then click Continue. Now we will need to add attribute mapping. I want primary email to be username. And let's add another mapping. I want department to be a group name. Once mapping is done, click Finish. By default, user access is off for everyone. We need to enable it. We will need to click User Access and change from off to on for everyone. That change can take a couple minutes. Let's double check that it's on for everyone. We will need to go again to the web and mobile applications. And as we see, Dragon Armor Project, user access on for everyone. Now I will show you how to check group name. Let's go to the directory, users, click on your user, and under user information we see department. In my case I call it IT. IT will be my group name. At this point IDP configuration is done. Let's continue with service provider configuration. Here is a recap of Google IDP configuration. Firstly, log in into the admin portal, admin.google.com. Then go to Applications and choose Web and Mobile Applications. Then click on Add Application and click Add Custom SAML Application. In Application Details, give application name and description. In my example, I used application name Dragon Armor Project and description SSL VPN. In the Google Identity Provider details, please use option 2. copy and paste SSO URL and entity ID into the template and download the certificate. In the service provider details, copy and paste from the template ACS URL and entity ID. Keep in mind that ACS URL will be the same as single sign-on URL. In attribute mapping details, please add proper mapping that you want to use. In my example, I use primary email as the username and department as a group name. Once configuration is done, the default action for the user access is off for everyone. Click on User Access and change the service status to On for everyone and click Save. Then double check that service is on for everyone. Go to the Applications, Web and Mobile Applications, and you will see that User Access is on for everyone. Now Google ADP portion is done, and we almost have finished to configure template with the proper data. Let's configure FortiGate firewall portion. Firstly, we will need to import certificate that we downloaded previously. To do that, we need to go to the system, certificates, create import, remote certificate. And we need to choose certificate that we downloaded previously from the Google ADP site. Open, click OK. Now that certificate appeared with the name remote_cert_2. I don't like this name, so I will rename it. To do that, I need to go to the CLI console, config certificate remote, show. I see the certificate remote_cert_2. I want to rename it, rename, cert name, and to, for example, Google-IDP. Show, and we see it has new name Google ADP. Here is a recap of step number 1. Import certificate from the Google ADP. To do that, we will need to go to the System, Certificates, Import, and click Remote Certificate. Choose certificate that we previously downloaded from the Google IDP site and click OK. After that, certificate will be imported with some name like remote_cert and some number. That is not friendly name and I don't like to see those. And I would recommend you to rename it. To do that, you need to go to the CLI console, config certificate remote, rename certificate name that you want to rename, and to, for example, Google IDP. That's it. I would also recommend you to increase remote timeout to 60 seconds, as default one can be too short when two-factor authentication is in use. To do that, we will need to go again to the CLI console, config system global, set remote auth timeout and 60. That will be in seconds, and done. Here is a recap of step number 2. Increase remote authentication timeout. I would strongly recommend you to increase remote authentication timeout to 60 seconds, as default one, 5 seconds, can be too short when two-factor authentication is in use. For example, to enter username and password can take 5 to 10 seconds. Plus, you will need to approve the code. So the minimum time should be 20-30 seconds. In normal environment, I would say that will be 60 seconds. To configure those, you will need to go to the config system global, set remote auth timeout 60, end. Now I will copy and paste pre-configured template into the FortiGate firewall. I have already replaced certificate name with the Google-IDP in the string IDP-cert. In our configuration, some of the links contain a special character, like question mark. And because of that, we cannot just copy and paste SAML configuration, as it will break the link and special character will be missing. There are two ways to fix it. First way via SSH. The idea here, to enter question mark, you will need to press Ctrl V, then enter question mark. And second way, it's most easiest way, via GUI. So let's copy our pre-configured template and let's go to the firewall. Open CLI console and paste our pre-configured template here. As we see, when we pasted the template, we see two errors. Token line, unmatched double quote. First error and the second error is here. Don't worry about that, just hit enter. Let's go to the single sign-on, refresh it and edit. So after SAML 2 we have missed question mark, and after IDP we have missed question mark. Hit OK. We're done. Here is a recap of step number 3. Copy and paste the pre-configured template into the FortiGate firewall. I have already replaced the certificate name with the Google-IDP in the string IDP cert. In our configuration, some of the links contain question mark. Because of that, we cannot just copy and paste SAML configuration, as it will break the link and special character, in our case question mark, will be missing. To fix it, there is two ways. Via SSH, you will need, before entering question mark, press Ctrl V, then question mark, then the rest of the link, or via GUI. To do that, just go to single sign-on, edit your SAML and make proper changes. Now we're almost done with configuring SAML for SSL VPN configuration. The only things that we have left is configure user group, policy and do portal mapping. You can do everything from CLI. I have already pre-configured all my user group, firewall policy and portal mapping, or you can do it from the GUI. I will show you, because I already pre-configured from CLI, so I will just copy template and we'll go to the CLI console and paste it out. Now, if I will go firstly to the user group, here is my Google-SAML, member SAML IDP, and if I double click on it, I will see the group name that I have configured on my Google server. Then I will go to the check the policy, firewall policy, so SSL VPN to the local LAN with my Google SAML group. Okay, and let's double check SSL VPN portal mapping. So I see my Google SAML group pointed to the default realm and with the full access portal. So in theory, everything should work. So let's check it out. Everything is worked as expected. So configuration is done. Here is a recap of step number 4. We will need to configure user group, policy, and do the portal mapping. You can do it from the CLI or from the GUI, it's really up to you. And after that, you need to test it out. Let's configure now FortiGate as service provider for SSL VPN access with the realms. To use realms, firstly we will need to enable SSL VPN realms in the feature visibility. To do that, we will need to go to specific video, in my case it will be root, go to the system, feature visibility, and enable SSL VPN realms. Hit apply. After that, we will need to configure realm. Go to the VPN, SSL VPN realms, create new. I will call it Google SAML and hit apply. After that, to use the realms, we will need to go to the SSL VPN settings, and I will edit my authentication and portal mapping to use realm for the Google SAML. Specify realm, Google SAML, hit OK. Apply. Done. Firstly, let's enable SSL VPN realms in the feature visibility. Go to the system, feature visibility, and enable SSL VPN realms. This setting will be per VDOM in multi-VDOM configuration, or you can do it from CLI. Go to config system settings, set GUI-SSL VPN-realms, enable, end. Once SSL VPN realms are enabled, you will need to go VPN, SSL VPN realms, create new, and give it a name for the realm. In my case, I will call it Google SAML. You can do it also from CLI, config VPN SSL web realm, edit your realm name, and now let's test it out. In my scenario, I have only one group Google SAML that is allowed in a policy, and this group is only pointed to the realm. Firstly, I want to check if my default portal is still redirecting to the SAML authentication. To do that, I will need to go to the dragon-armor.grakov.lab column 63443. As I can see, there is no redirect appeared. Now I will check it with the realm. To do that, I will need to go to the dragon-armor.grakov.lab column 63443 / Google-SAML. It's my realm. Keep in mind that realm is case sensitive. I do see there is a redirect. Now I will log it in with my password. And voila, I have access. Now we will discuss how logout works and how to achieve one of the following behaviors. First behavior, to log out from the SSL VPN portal only. This will not log you out from the identity provider. Second behavior, log out from the SSL VPN and from the IDP side. And third behavior, log out from the SSL VPN, IDP side and back to the logout page of the service provider. Now I will show you how logout works and what settings we need to implement to achieve one of the three behaviors. The first behavior, to log you out only from SSL VPN portal. This behavior will not log you out from the identity provider account. Second behavior, to log you out from the SSL VPN portal and from the identity provider account. And the third behavior, log you out from the SSL VPN portal, identity provider account, and redirect back to the logout page of the FortiGate SSL VPN or your service provider. To achieve first behavior, to log you out from the SSL VPN portal only, we will need to go to the user and authentication, single sign-on, edit our SAML configuration, and make sure that identity provider configuration does not contain single logout service URL. It should be empty. GUI for some reason does not allow me to remove this setting. If I will just remove it and I will go back again, this setting will be still there. To remove it, we will need to use CLI console. Go to CLI console, config user SAML, edit our SAML configuration, and we will need to unset IDP single logout URL. So setting is no longer there, and let's go double check it again via GUI. So single sign-on, editor SAML, and we see it's empty. Now let's verify that we're getting proper behavior. Let's go again to our SSL VPN portal, and we will log it in again. Okay, so we'll log it into the portal. Let's check it from the CLI. Execute VPN SSL VPN list. We see that our user group, and from which IP it's logged in. Okay, now let's log out. We haven't seen any redirect to the IDP. So, and let's check from the FortiGate. There is no SLVPN user that logged in. Now, if I will go back to the portal, it didn't ask me any credentials. So, which means we're still logged in identity provider. Now I will show you how to achieve second behavior. Log out from the SLVPN portal and from the identity provider. To achieve that, we will need to go to the user and authentication, single sign-on, and edit our SAML configuration. In identity provider configuration, we will need to add in a single logout service URL accounts.google.com/logout and apply the changes. Now let's do the testing that we're getting second behavior. We will need to log in to the SLVPN portal. I'm entering my credentials. I'm logged in and I will do logout. I see firstly it logged me out from the SLVPN portal, and secondly it's logged me out from the identity provider. Let's verify on FortiGate that we don't have any user associated. There is no user associated, so we achieve the second behavior. Now I will show you how to achieve third behavior. Log out from the SLVPN identity provider and back to the logout page of the service provider. We will need to do modifications on Google IDP site. We will need to go to the security, authentication, SSO with third-party identity provider. Check mark set up SSO with third-party identity provider and enter FortiGate's links for login and for logout. Click Save. Now let's test it third behavior. Let's log in to the SSL VPN portal. It's asking the credentials, entering credentials. We're logged in. Now let's do logout. It's logged out from the SSL VPN portal, IDP, and it's redirected back to the logout page of service provider. Let's do verifications. There is no user associated on a FortiGate. And let's try again to log in to our SSL VPN portal. And again, it's asking the credentials. So everything works as expected. Here is recap of first behavior. Log out from the SSL VPN portal only. This one will not log you out from the identity provider account. To achieve this behavior, we will need to do modifications in the CLI console. Config user SAML, edit your SAML configuration, and set idp-single-logout-url, end. Here is recap of second behavior, log out from the SSL VPN portal and from the identity provider account. To achieve this behavior, we will need to go to the user and authentication, single sign-on, edit our SAML configuration. In identity provider configuration, we will need to add single logout URL service, accounts.google.com/logout. Here is a recap of third behavior. Log out from the SSL VPN, IDP, and back to the logout page of service provider. In addition of steps of second behavior, we will need to do modifications on IDP site on Google. To do that, we will need to go to the security, authentication, single sign-on with the third-party identity provider. Check mark on a setup SSO with third-party identity provider and paste links from the service provider for login and logout. Now we all know on how to configure SAML, and now it is time to troubleshoot. I will show you examples of common issues that may appear during the configuration process. The main debugs will be DIAC debug application SAML D-1 and DIAC debug application SSL VPN -1. You can use those debugs separately or together. It really depends on situation or the issue. Additionally, you can use browser plugins that will help you to analyze SAML communication. Now I will show you examples of the issues and we will discuss how to fix it. Issue number 1. Not getting redirected to the single sign-on page of identity provider when trying to get access to the SSL VPN. Possible reason: when there are no policy configured for SAML, FortiGate firewall will not use single sign-on and it will not redirect to the identity provider side. Please check the policy and make sure that SAML group is pointed in a policy. Secondly, portal could be configured for the specific realm. Please check portal mapping. Thirdly, you have configured policy but still not redirecting to the identity provider side. In some cases, FortiGate may not refresh the policy and you will need to disable and re-enable the policy. Finally, SAML could be configured on a service provider in the wrong spot. There are two spots where the SAML can be configured on a FortiGate firewall. Config user SAML is used for FortiGate SSL VPN access and it can act only as a service provider. And there is config system SAML. It's used for FortiGate admin access and it can act as a service provider and identity provider. Issue number 2. Typos. The main issue that will lead to multiple errors. When you configure in SAML, both service provider and identity provider side must have proper and identical data. Please make sure that proper links are in use and not missing any values. Always compare both sides, service provider and identity provider. One of the most common typos issues 403 application not configured for the user. When there is a typo on a service provider or identity provider side for the service provider entity ID you may see this error. 404, the requested URL was not found on this server. This error normally indicates that URL is used on the service provider side for IDP single sign-on is wrong or has the typos or missing values. Another most common error, invalid request ACS URL in request does not match configured ACS URL. If there is a typo in ACS URL link, the debug application SAML D-1 will indicate this error. Error: the identifier of the provider is unknown to Lasso server. When there is a typo in identity provider entity ID field, the debug application SAML D-1 will indicate this error. One of the most common one, no username info in a SAML response, or no group info in a SAML response. When there is a typo in attribute mapping, the debug application SSL VPN-1 will indicate this error. Issue number 3. Fail to verify signature. The debug application SAML D-1 may indicate this error. This error normally appears when wrong certificate is pointed in a SAML configuration. Issue number 4. Wrong window or time expired. In some cases, the debug application SSL VPN-1 may indicate that time is expired. This issue normally related to the default remote authentication timeout, as it can be too short when two-factor authentication is in use, or user has a long password that he needs to type for longer time than 5 seconds. Clock skew issue. When there is a different time on the service provider and identity provider side, the debug application SAML D-1 may indicate error, invalid assertion, and clock skew issue. This error normally means that time is out of sync on the service provider or identity provider side. In some cases, you may need to have control on how many seconds can be difference between service provider and identity provider side. On FortiOS 7.04 and up, clock tolerance option is added. When you troubleshoot SSL VPN with SAML authentication, in some cases FortiClient tunnel mode may experience the issue. And my recommendation is always use the web mode for the testing. If web mode works, then the issue is on FortiClient side. That's it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.